Now it's time to go on to our feature story of the night. Roughly 200 protesters from Sierra Leone marched on Downing Street yesterday to call for greater action on the Ebola virus. This comes as media reports have indicated that the rate of infection is slowing. But does that mean that the situation is under control? Nathaniel Amos Sansom has more.
Sierra Leonean protesters outside of number 10 Downing Street yesterday. They were calling on the UK government to do more in the fight against Ebola, which has hit the West African country hard. Many feel that enough has not been done by the international community to stop the virus. Yesterday, the head of the United Nations Ebola Response Unit called on the world to step up aid and support aimed at containing the spread of the virus, which has so far claimed roughly 5,000 lives.
What we need are three basic things to get this crisis under control, to add to the effort. We need people, especially trained medical personnel, people who can operate clinics, Ebola treatment clinics, community care centers. We need material, and we need money.
In the West African nations affected by the virus, medical aid and supplies can only go so far. In Sierra Leone, which had never seen cases of Ebola before this year, the country's medical infrastructure was ill-prepared for such an outbreak, with only around 120 doctors for its population of 6 million people even before the disease struck. Here, British soldiers give training to young medical workers in the nation's capital, Freetown, on how to deal with Ebola cases. The British mission said that the situation was moving in the right direction.
The virus is, the numbers that are afflicted by the virus are still increasing, but we are making real progress in starting to build treatment facilities for people that desperately need beds, in starting to increase the efficiency of the burial system, the quarantining system and the reporting system. So although we're not yet starting to see the curve start to bend down rather than increase, we're putting things in place which are going to lead us in that direction, I'm sure.
While necessary, this work comes with serious risks. Some 250 healthcare workers have already died in the three main Ebola-affected nations of Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Over the next month, the training centre is expected to be graduating 240 educated workers a week.
And to us, I think it's in the right direction, because we were waiting for goodwill people to come to assist and to at least make sure our health workers are safe in the sense they practice what they are doing, whatever they are doing in their workstation safely. So it's a welcome news, and we are looking forward to more people to come and also assist us at a time like this.
There have been reports in recent days that the rate of new Ebola infections is already slowing down. However, the outbreak has shown how a lack of medical infrastructure in one part of the world can have consequences for the world as a whole. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, The Report.
Well, joining me in the studio to discuss this is Ben Webster, Disaster Response Manager of the British Red Cross, and Jamie Hitchen from the Africa Research Institute in London. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Jamie, the story is that the rate of infection is slowing. Is that true?
Well, I think that's been not really slowing, but the suggestions are that they are potentially peaking at the moment. I don't think that that perhaps the figures has been very difficult to gather the data throughout the outbreak so far. And I think that while there are suggestions that the figures may be peaking, there is a real need to recognise that this is not the end of the crisis by any means. We're still looking at 20, 30, 40 cases a day. And so it's very important that it doesn't seem like that's the start of the end, basically.
Ben, is that your reading?
I think we have to be really cautious about projecting, when this might finish, because it's an extremely fluid situation. It could just take one event, a poorly planned or run funeral or something for the outbreak to start up again. So we need to be really cautious and make sure that there are sufficient resources to tackle the outbreak now.
And Sierra Leone has been, well, very unprepared for this. Is one of the concerns about it spreading, that if this happened again, the spread would not be contained either in Sierra Leone or in another country equally unprepared?
I mean, this is an unprecedented outbreak that we've seen today. There have been smaller outbreaks in other countries like Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo. This is clearly challenging the infrastructure and the health facilities in the countries affected. So we need to make sure that those come out of this stronger as well, so that if there are future outbreaks, that they can be managed.
Well, I mean, it's probably not the thing that most people are concerned about immediately, but it does have that kind of impact if the countries where this has happened are weakened economically, if their infrastructure is weakened, if their health infrastructure is weakened. What kind of damage has it done in those terms? I mean, obviously the deaths are the most important thing, but there may be more deaths if this has happened as well, or to the degree that this has happened.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of, there's two aspects. The healthcare aspect, we've seen a lot of health workers, unfortunately, perish treating patients. Sierra Leone, for example, was already very under-prepared in terms of the number of doctors and nurses per person in the country. And I think that it's going to really be an issue of ensuring that they have some sort of resource going forward to do that. Economically, the GDP decline has obviously been well documented. Around 3 or 4% has been suggested in terms of a decline from 11 to 8 by the World Bank. But also in terms of just the day-to-day market trader has been severely affected by the Ebola crisis. They don't have the mechanisms of support, for example, in the country, no welfare. And there's a real need to recognize that without support beyond the Ebola crisis, that these issues are going to only foster the sort of instability and weak infrastructure that caused this outbreak in the first place.
So, Ben, do you think there's a possibility of a kind of malignant cycle opening up here, that the weakness of the infrastructure allows the virus to spread, the spread of the virus weakens the infrastructure?
I think it's potential consequence. So we have to make sure that we get on top of the outbreak now, but whilst doing so, support the current infrastructure and certainly invest. I mean, there's a risk here that the current outbreak undermines the investment that's been made over years and decades. So we have to make sure that the outbreak is contained as quickly as possible, so that spread doesn't have the massive impact that we fear, but at the same time build up the infrastructure, the capacity to be able to cope in the longer term.
And from your point of view, from the sort of Red Cross's point of view, is that now happening with sufficient force? We've seen the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal and so forth. Is that making a sort of watershed change in how it's being dealt with?
I think it does. It still takes time to scale up the response. I mean, it's one thing to have money, but you still have to be able to get the people and the infrastructure in place, the logistics capacity to deliver all the services. So financial support is important and it's good, and we need people to continue donating to the DEC appeal, and we're doing our best to turn that into support for the people affected, and also into prevention as well. I mean, that's the most effective way to stop this outbreak, is to prevent people getting it in the first place. So that's where we're focusing our efforts as the DEC member agencies.
And Jamie, what about the development of vaccines? I mean, we've heard a number of different stories about this over the period of the outbreak. One, that there was no real interest in developing it beforehand. Now that there's very rapid development of it, what's the truth of that?
Well, I think that the response to developing a vaccine has been very much in line with the outbreak of Ebola. There was, the ZMapp drug that first came out. There was a very small number of vaccines available. I don't think anyone was really expecting this kind of scale. And I think that the efforts have been made in response to sort of the need and demand for, as Ben mentions, the prevention, which obviously is the key way that this virus can be brought to a halt in West Africa.
Mm. I mean, what do you make of some of the? The prevention with the disease is a relatively simple thing, isn't it? It's not. It doesn't require. I mean, obviously the vaccines, once you've got it, that we want those to happen. But the prevention side of it, which, as we've said, is the most important. That's actually a sort of simple thing, isn't it?
In theory, yes. I think it's very easy for rumours to spread. What we're seeing in some of the countries affected is fear and panic spreading. If the messaging is not correct, then it could actually fuel the spread.
Has that been a government problem? Is it a problem that what some of the governments have been saying hasn't been accurate, hasn't been addressed in the right way to the population?
I think wherever you don't have mass communication that's available to everybody, there's always a risk of rumours spreading, of hearsay spreading by word of mouth. So it's extremely challenging in some of the rural communities in particular to get the same message to every single person. So that's one of the challenges. So yes, in theory, it's relatively straightforward. If we change behaviour overnight, then this whole situation could finish in 3 weeks. But the actuality, putting that into practice is much more challenging, but that's what we're working on.
Yeah, some say that even with mass media that tends to happen. But if the message is that important, what's the alternative in places where you don't have that kind of mass media? Is it simply a question of getting people from the Red Cross or wherever on the ground saying the right things in enough numbers?
Yes, I think that getting people out to these local communities and talking to them is perhaps the best medium. You have also traditional leaders, religious leaders, elders in these communities who have a lot of weight in shaping the influence in that particular village, and they are perhaps areas that can be targeted, or people that can be targeted to spread the message if they can be brought on side. Similarly, looking at the potential role for survivors, if they're ready to do that, they can also have some way of going out to the communities and kind of telling them about their experiences and dispelling some of these myths that have evolved and spiraled out of control in certain cases.
And how effective are the military deployments? I mean, we see stuff about the British military being involved. Is that an effective way of doing it? Or another high-profile case is the deployment of Cuban health care officials. How do you weigh those various contributions to it?
Yeah, I think the military assets certainly have a role to play in this situation. As I mentioned, some of the challenges we're facing around infrastructure and logistical supply chains, and that's where the military have excellent capacity and expertise, constructing new Ebola treatment centres, getting a functioning supply chain in place. All of those are positive aspects, and having over 100 Cuban doctors deployed is extremely positive and brave. I think the key thing is to have a well-coordinated response. So those components have to feed into an overall well-coordinated, well-integrated response that's looking at all of the different pillars. So there's treatment of infected patients, but there's also the prevention, there's contact tracing, there's safe and dignified burials, making sure that those are done properly. So the whole operation has to be well coordinated with the different actors playing to their strengths.
Jamie, I mean, we said right at the beginning of this discussion that that it's not over till it's over. But bearing that sort of warning in mind, if things continue on the trajectory they are at the moment, are you looking at a timescale when you think, okay, this can be sorted, this is done?
I don't think it's really possible at the moment to put a timescale on what's happening. I don't think anyone has really fully got to grips yet with the crisis itself. And now with the large sort of scale-up actually being realised on the ground with the deployment of military personnel in Liberia and Sierra Leone, the arrival today of Argus, one of the naval vessels that's there to provide extra supplies, it looks as though strong action is now being taken. But I think to speculate on an end date or when this might be brought under control is something that I'm not willing to do.
Still too much road to run?
I mean, it is challenging in terms of the epidemiology of it. It's difficult to get good numbers, so it's really difficult to project. But what we do know is that we can't afford to wait for this to escalate. We have to make sure that we get on top of the outbreak sooner rather than later. So we can't afford to hold back resources if they're available. It needs to go in now to contain the outbreak before we see it escalate. Okay,
Ben, Jamie, thanks very much for that discussion. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on tonight's programme. I want to thank all of my guests for coming in and to you at home for watching. Remember, you can keep up with our conversations here on Twitter. You can use the hashtag @IslamChannel and the hashtag #TheReport. For now, we'll leave you with some footage representing the world's a gap in wealth, after a new report from Oxfam revealed that the number of billionaires has more than doubled since the global financial crash of 2008. The charity has calculated that the richest 85 people on the planet own as much as the poorest half of humanity. That's nearly 4 billion people. Oxfam believes that the extreme economic inequality which exploded across the world in the last 30 years is one of the biggest economic, social and political challenges of our time. Well, do you agree? You can find us at Islam Channel and use the hashtag #TheReport and tell us exactly what you think. But until then, good night.